Hi everyone, this is just a quick video on chord inversions. This is just going to outline the basics of chord inversions, so what are they? And we're also going to look a little bit at how we answer questions that might be in an exam that are related to chord inversions. So what is a chord inversion? Well, let's take a simple three-note chord, so a triad. Let's take C major, okay? We're going to take a C major triad. So the notes of that are C, E, and G. We'll draw it on our stave over here. We've got C, E, and G. So when we have these three notes, the first note is called the first, surprisingly. Sometimes called the tonic. The third note is, the second note is called the third. And then the last note there is called the fifth of the chord, okay? Now, basically, chords can be in one of three positions. They can be in root position, and that is when the bottom note of the chord, so we're looking at the bottom note, is the first. So you can see here, this bottom note is C. C is the first, so that means this chord is in root position. So the first is the bottom note. When the first is the bottom note, it's root position. A chord in first inversion, that's our next one we're going to look at, is slightly different. When a chord is in first inversion, we have the same three notes, but they're in a different order. And you can see in this case, we have an E as the bottom note, okay? Now, when we have the third as the bottom note, which we have in this case, that is when we have a first inversion of the chord. So the third is the bottom note. Okay? And finally, if we change the order again, and we start off with a G as the bottom note of the chord, we can see that that means the fifth is our bottom note. Now, when the fifth of the chord is the bottom note, that means the chord is in second inversion. So that is when the fifth is the bottom note. Okay, so bearing that in mind, let's look at a couple of questions that we might get asked. So let's say I get given this chord here, okay? Let's say I've got a D, an F sharp, and an A. What I would need to do is I need to look at this, and well, let's say I've been asked to identify what this chord is, and I also need to identify whether it's in root position, first inversion, or second inversion. How do I work that out? Well, first thing to do is work out what the notes are. So what do I have here? I have a D, I have an F sharp, and I have an A, okay? So that, if I was to think about, right, what chord is this? I could work it out and be like, okay, that's a D major chord, D major. And luckily, what we'd then do is rearrange these letters so that they were in the right order. So they were going 1, 3, 5. Now, luckily, this is already in 1, 3, 5. So that's good. Next thing that I would do is I would look at the very bottom note and I would go, okay, what's the bottom note there? The bottom note is D. Okay. Then I just look at these notes here and go, okay, so that's the bottom note is D. The D is the first. So if the first is the bottom note, then that means it's in root position. In which case, my answer would just be D major. If my chord is in root position, I don't really need to write anything after. When you write D major, or even just D, that just means that it's a major chord and it's in root position. You don't need to write anything else. Let's do a different example. Let's try something like this. Let's do this. Okay, so you can see here there's two things that are different from that last one. First thing is we have a note now in the bass clef. The second thing is that we don't just have three notes, we have lots of notes, okay? So, first of all, let's work out what kind of chord we're looking at here. Like, what is the chord? So let's label our notes. So we've got an A here, we've got a C, we've got an A, a C, and an F. Now, if I was to work out, right, what chord is made up of that, I could identify that that is an F major triad, okay? And I'm also just going to write out the first, third, and fifth of an F major triad. So that would be F, A, and C, okay? 1, 3, and 5. So, now what I need to do is look at the bottom note and work out whether it's root position, first inversion, or second inversion. All I'm going to do is look at the bottom note, and that is an A. So an A is the third of the F chord. So that means the third is the bottom note, so it means it's first inversion. So the answer for this would be F, and then I would write first inversion, or first inv. Please note that you can see that sometimes actually I have the same note doubled. So you can see I've got 2 A's in this chord and I've got 2 C's. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's doubling notes. That might happen, okay? Just treat it like there's one of them. The other thing is, even when the notes whether the notes in the bass clef or the treble clef, you still just get that bottom note. The lowest note of the chord is the one you use to tell whether it's root position, first inversion, or second inversion. All right? It's all about that bass note. Let's do one more. Now this time we're actually going to have a 7 chord, okay? Now when you get a 7 chord in this situation, you still just treat it like anything else when you're working out the root position, the first inversion, or the second inversion. The bass note's only ever going to be the first, third, or fifth. It's never going to be the 7th note, okay? So let's look at this. Let's do something like, let's do this one. D, F natural there. We'll have a B and a G up there. So let's look at our notes. First of all, we're going to work out what the triad is. Not the triad, sorry, what the chord is. So what notes do I have? I've got D, I've got an F natural, I've got a B, and I've got a G up here. So if I work out what those 4 notes make up chord-wise, that would be a G7 triad, because I've got my G, B, and D, which is my G major, and then the F is the 7th of G, so that would be there, the 7th. Okay, so this is my first, third, fifth, and you don't need to write this, but that's the 7th. Okay, so it's a G7. Now that I've worked out it's a G7, again, all I need to do is work out whether it's in root position, first inversion, or second inversion. So let's look at the bottom note. There we go, it's a D. I can see that the D is the 5th of that triad. So when the 5th is the bottom note, it means it's second inversion. So my answer for this one would be G7, because it's a G7 chord, but it's in second inversion position. So G7, second inversion. Okay, so just to recap, the first thing you have to do when you get asked to identify a chord is work out all the notes. So 1, work out the individual notes. Second thing you have to do is work out what triad it is, or work out the chord. It might not be a triad, it might be a 7 chord. So for example, it could be a D chord, it could be a G minor, it could be a C7. Okay, work out the chord. Then 3, write out the first, third, fifth of chord. So for instance, if it's got a D, if it's a D chord, you'd write out that it's D, F sharp, and A, first, third, fifth. If you do have a 7 chord, don't worry about writing the 7 down. You still just need to write the first, third, and fifth, okay? Just make sure that in your final answer you explain that it's a 7 chord. 4, work out what the bottom note is. And that will let you know whether it's in root position, first inversion or second inversion. And then all you need to do last of all is write out your answer. Oh, and answer. So for example, if it was a D chord in first inversion, you would just write D, first inversion, like that. If it was a C7 chord in root position, you would just write C7, because remember, if you don't write anything after it, it means it's in root position. Let's say it was an A minor in second inversion, you would do A minor, or you could do A minor like that if you wanted, and second inversion. Okay, so I hope that helps. There is another question you'll get in chord inversions when you need to write out the bass line when you're giving the chord information, but there's a separate video on that for you to watch. All right, hope that helps. Bye-bye.